As makers, we can sometimes forget one aspect that will make all the difference between a successful project and a failed one. We often forget to make room for change.
And now it's time for some geekification.
What's up, you awesome geeks? I'm Brian, this is the Smuggler's Room, and in today's geekification, I want to give you permission. I want to give you permission to make room for change in your projects. Let's use a real-world example for this, shall we? Let's take a space that I see successes and failures every single day. Let's talk about our Star Wars room build project. Did you know that our Star Wars room build has been started and stopped for over 7 years? Shh, don't tell anyone. Actually, on second thought, let's tell everyone because that's the point of today's episode. You see, we started the room build project with this imitation Millennium Falcon nav computer console build. It's nothing more than a cabinet of MDF and as many random bits as I could find. I also stole every Christmas light my wife had in our Christmas decoration bin. Then I glued, painted, screwed concrete tubes, PVC pipe, styrofoam, and all types of other pieces into the walls and called it good. Later, I added some poorly made cabinets, and then, in my disappointment, I gave up. Well, I gave up for a short time. Long enough to convince my wife that in order to fully realize this obsession, I was going to need a little bit more than just the corner of the room. So I started working on about half of the basement. Phase 2 of this project was a much bigger deal, and it all started with MDF. Yeah, a lot of MDF. I would purchase 2-foot by 4-foot pre-cut 1/4-inch MDF sheets and create panel after panel. No CNC, no laser cutter, no 3D printers, just a circular saw and a jigsaw, along with our shop vac. Okay, maybe a drill, screws, and some other stuff, but nothing fancy. I didn't really have a plan either. I just cut, glued, painted, and repeated. I added random junk from bins, used way too much hot glue, and cobbled together one strange piece after another. I even took the time to build a ridiculously poorly constructed poker table that was too big, clunky, and I loved it. However, the room as an entire build was never completed. I never reached a state of finished. But you know, that really never stopped us from using the space. We had parties of all kinds in this galactically goofy environment, some more ridiculous than others. And I would tinker on the room too, spending time building new pieces, some that were actually never installed. Sometime later though, I abandoned this project entirely. I just simply stopped working on the room and I gave up. You know, a big project like this, something that never really reached my expectations, just started to seem like something I couldn't do, something I couldn't build. You see, I forgot the cardinal rule of making. I forgot to allow myself the space to change. I forgot to allow myself to alter it, to rework it, to stop, to evaluate, and then get restarted on it brand new. When I finally realized this, I got excited again. It was then I started to redesign the space. I took a tape measure and I mapped out the room. I popped open SketchUp and I laid out the project. This time, the way I wanted it to look. This time with all the Star Wars reference I could digest, and I created a proper plan. Now I know a lot of you right now are saying, wow, what a waste of time and materials that was. Well, let me address both of those. Let's start with the materials. I didn't waste much of anything. As a matter of fact, I repurposed almost all of it. Take, for example, the corner of our shop build. I was able to repurpose so much of it here. Obviously this wasn't everything, but it was a big chunk. I also saved all the greeblies that I could. I was able to recycle a lot of them because after all, it was a bunch of random pieces of plastic, a lot of juice lids and other bits like that can be recycled. So what about the wasted time? Well, none of that time was wasted. I built so many things in that room, and not just the random junk on the walls, but things like an Imperial foosball table, a budget Boba Fett display where I used trash cans to create the armor. We built a Han and Carbonite 1:1 scale that included a custom display, once again out of MDF. I'm sure I can account for a large portion of the MDF consumption where I live. All of these projects were worth their weight in gold when it came to time. Why? Because I learned so many things while I was building everything. I learned how to use the tools I have better. I learned how to use new tools. I improved my painting skills. I learned what it was like to fail at a project. And I learned how heavy MDF actually is. But the most important lesson of all is that I learned to make room for change. Putting that into my workflow made all the difference in the world. Now our room build seems to have more of a focus. Things look better to me than they did before. As slow as the process in the room is, each and every piece feels the way I want it to. I can see the result of the time I took to learn, and I can see just how awesome this space can be because I was willing to change. I was able to see that certain parts of the space just weren't going to work, that certain materials I used wouldn't have longevity, that overall the look wasn't what I was after, and I was willing to say, okay, let's alter this and go forward in a new direction. And not to mention all of this, I now have the entire basement. I'm not just restricted to the corner anymore. The point of all of this, my friends, is I want you to make room in your projects for everything. Make room for failure. Make room for improvements, but above all, make room for change. Remember, it's always about the journey. It's always about the adventure. And all of that happens when you're building something out of nothing.